All right, good morning. How's everybody doing? Great. Hey, before we jump into the sermon, a couple things to put on your radar. This next Friday night, we're having a movie night. So if you got kids or grandkids, bring them here at 7 o'clock. We're meeting in the fellowship hall, watching Sonic 3. So, you know, like I said last week, you better catch up. You have less time now than you ever have to be ready for the sequel. And then this, not this Sunday and not the next, but 2 weeks from today, we're having an opportunity to know a little bit more about our church called Activate. Activate is a route to membership, but it's also, if you're just curious about faith or what it means to be part of the story God is writing here at Canyons, it is the perfect opportunity for you. So we're serving lunch. It'll be right after church. If you want to be part of this, here's what you want to do. Sign up on your connection card. And in the middle of your program that you received when you're walking in today, there is a connection card. Just pull that thing out right now. I'm not saying anything of substance for the next 4 or 5 minutes. So you can just do whatever, fill that thing out right now. And then later in our service, when we receive the offering, what we'll do is you just drop that in the bucket. So does that work for everybody? Great. All right. Hey, we are in the home stretch in our 2 Corinthians series. Literally, it's just this week and next week, and we are done, and we're all going to breathe a sigh of relief. It's going to feel great. But to get ourselves just kind of ready for 2 Corinthians chapter 11 today, do you ever see something and you're like, oh my gosh, I think that was made for me? You're looking on Netflix, you can't figure out what to watch, and then out of nowhere, there's a suggestion, and it says, this is a cooking show with some wisecracking comedian who is narrating the whole thing. You're like, I think that was made for me. I love the concept behind the TV show The Voice. Admittedly, I don't think I've ever actually watched the whole episode, but that's a whole thing for another day. But I love the concept behind it of you've got all these professional musicians and vocalists that they have to listen to somebody sing with their back to them. And when they hear somebody, they're like, yes, that's exactly what I would love to work with. They press that button and their chair spins around like this was made for me, right? Like I'm ready to work with this person. So it's the I'm in button. And so for me personally, I have some things that I just know that was made for me. If there's a movie and it has one of these three things, I am all in. If it has a hostage situation, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing for the next hour and a half. I do know I'm doing this, right? I'm watching this, okay? If there's time travel of any kind, I'm captivated. I don't know what it is about it. Or if there's a ticking clock. And when you start combining some of these elements, I am just beside myself. You look at a movie like Back to the Future. Back to the Future combines 2/3 of those things. There's time travel, there's a ticking clock, right? He's got to get the time machine down the street right as the lightning strikes, or otherwise he's stuck in 1955 forever. I can't get enough of it. The movie Speed. Right? Speed, I can't get enough of it. You're right? It's a hostage situation. There's a ticking clock that, the bus is going to run out of gas. You've got a movie like Die Hard. It is, no matter what I'm doing, I will stop and watch the rest of Die Hard. Now, if you combine all three at any point, my head will explode, right? I love those things. It is made for me. If I'm on a diet and I go to a kid's birthday party, and they have pizza and ice cream, I am no longer on that diet, right? That is made for me in this moment, right? If you guys been there, you just there's certain situations, there's certain things, when as soon as you see it, you're like, this is perfect. This is exactly what I've been looking for. And so the thing is where we're at, and I know you're wondering how's he gonna make the turn to the Bible? So here's how I'm making the turn. In the church in Corinth, the people were being misled by this group of false teachers. And the thing is they are idiots, the people that are leading them in this direction. And you might wonder well, why would they still follow these people even if it doesn't really work, if it's not good advice, if it's not even good exegesis, if it's just not good, period? Why would they follow? Well, and the reason why is because as they looked at it, they're like, this was made for me. What they were saying, what these false teachers were communicating, it was perfect for what their ears wanted to hear. And so let me catch you up. Those who've been tracking with us this whole time, you're like, I know what this is about. Those who are newer, here's what the book of 2 Corinthians is all about. You've got this guy by the name of Paul, and he started the church. And the way that Paul would start churches is he would get them off the ground, he would train his replacements, and he would move on to the next city where he would start another church. It's like called church planting, where he's like just planting these in these different areas around the known world. But what he would do is he would still stay in contact with the church. So he would through correspondence, through his friends who would be going through the different cities, they would give him reports, he would send them back advice, and he would pastor them sometimes from afar. So the church in Corinth was kind of an interesting place. Whereas a lot of the other areas of the world, if you became a Christian, you were under intense persecution. Not so in Corinth. Corinth prided themselves on being very open-minded. They prided themselves on being a place that was inclusive. And so what happens is the church, when it gets started, because it was just so inclusive of a culture, they started to allow certain things into the church that really started to lead them in a weird direction. And so Paul writes a letter called 1 Corinthians that basically says, guys, you got to get this in line. You got to stop doing the wrong things. I won't go through the list of all the stuff they were doing. It's pretty bad. If you ever want to check it out, pretty cool. 1 Corinthians, read it. So then what happens is they get some of the stuff cleaned up, and then in the vacuum, this group of false teachers come in, and they start to lead the church astray. So word gets back to Paul, and he says, we need to address some of these things. So he writes them another letter, which is 2 Corinthians. And in chapter 11, what he's going to do, he's going to get to a little bit of the heart of the matter of like, here's how you were misled. In fact, this is what he says. He says, I hope you will put up with a little more of my foolishness. Please bear with me, for I am jealous for you with the jealousy of God himself. I promised you as a pure bride to one husband, Christ, but I fear that somehow your pure and undivided devotion to Christ will be corrupted. Just as Eve was deceived by the cunning ways of the serpent, you happily put up with whatever anyone tells you, even if they preach a different Jesus than the one we preach, or a different kind of spirit than the one you received, or a different kind of gospel than the one you believed. Here's what he's saying. Guys, you're not really showing much discernment here. That, frankly, they're speaking with a lot of foolishness. It's like, that's why I'm if you want foolishness, I'll give you some foolishness, is what he's saying. And he's like, the reason why you have listened to them is because they're just telling you everything that you wanted to hear. They're pandering. It's kind of like the old commercials, or if you're old enough, infomercials, where they get up and say, you can eat whatever you want and still lose weight. And you're like, that sounds great. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. But eating whatever I wanted got me into this mess, right? Like that's not really the right thing. Or whenever a politician gets up and says, we can give you all the services that you've ever dreamed of, and we're going to cut taxes at the same time. You're like, well, how does that work? Well, the reason it works for us is because that's exactly what we wanted to hear. And basically, that is what these false teachers are doing to the Corinthians, is that they have a set of cultural values that as soon as they start to speak, they're like, whoa, this is perfect for me. Now, let me just kind of unpack a little bit of this here. We don't actually know exactly what message these false teachers were giving, because like there's a little bit of vagueness in it, and that's good news, bad news. The good news is we have through context, it's probably that they were introducing a lot of Old Testament laws, meaning like you got to follow the dietary restrictions that the Old Testament gave. They probably were saying like, guys, if you're in this church, you got to be circumcised to be a member. Like there's all these different things. And the thing is, 2,000 years later, you are probably not as tempted to fall for some of that teaching. And so the good news behind this is that because it's not there, we don't dismiss this and say, well, this has no application to my life whatsoever. So what we can do is we can actually pull out some of the principles that are found here in 2 Corinthians and say, all right, these people were misled by a teaching that really tickled their ears and was exactly what they wanted to hear. How did they get deceived? How did they move beyond where they should have? And the problem is that they had great packaging and a terrible product. Great packaging and a terrible product. Now, if you are as old as I am, you might remember like going to Walmart or Target as a kid or even as an adult, and you would buy electronics and it would come in packaging very similar to this. All right, do you guys remember this? It was like that vacuum sealed thing, and the only way to get the product out is you had to take a pair of scissors and it would make the plastic as sharp as a knife, right? And so you'd start like trying to pull it apart and your hands would be getting all bloody and you just call your mom and she would do it for you. That was old packaging, but then in 2007, something incredible happened. We got the iPhone. And here's the thing about the iPhone was that it came in the most incredible cardboard box you could ever imagine, right? It's like you take the lid off and it feels like you're breaking some sort of like air seal, and you put it back on and like this is not a lie, I'm actually doing it right now. You feel the air like coming out of the packaging. It's so incredibly nice. And the thing is, for some reason, and I don't know why, I always hold on to the box. I'm never gonna put my phone back in it, but you put it in a drawer and you're like, I have to keep this forever. So here's where this became a problem in the electronics world. Is suddenly every terrible electronics company realized something. If we just, instead of spending 12 cents on our packaging, if we spend $1.25, okay, we can put our headphones that cost us $2.70 to make, and we can sell it for at least $10 more. Have you guys experienced this? Like you go and you buy something, and it comes in the most incredible package, and it lasts for about 15 minutes, and then you have to throw it away. It's a terrible product, but in great packaging. And that's exactly what was going on here in Corinth. It was a terrible product in great packaging. In fact, this is what Paul says. He says in verse 4, we read it a second ago. He's like, they're teaching you a different kind of gospel than the one that you believed. And for us as Christians, the gospel is everything. The reason why we gather together on a Sunday morning instead of going out and enjoying, weather and nature and getting out onto the beach, the reason why we gather together is because we are so convicted by the gospel. The idea that God came down to earth and he rescued us from the depths of our sin. Like this is everything. And the idea that they would start falling prey to a different kind of gospel is incredibly dangerous. And so I felt like what would be appropriate for us was, before we can actually talk about what the false gospel is, we need to talk about like what the real gospel is. And I'm getting pretty high tech today, so I got some props. So let's talk about what the gospel actually is. The gospel starts with sin. And so what is sin? Sin is the things that we do that we shouldn't. It's also sometimes the things that we don't do that we should. So whenever you lie, whenever you cheat, whenever you steal, or whenever you have the opportunity to be generous and you're like, I'm just not gonna do it. Or whenever like you're at a position where like, man, your spouse deserves your time and attention, you're like, I'm not gonna do it. Like, right, it's the things that we do and the things that we don't do. Sin is the reason why there's suffering in the world. Sin is the reason why there is death. As we'll talk about in a little bit, it came in through our first parents and it's infected all of us. Now, the problem of sin is that it leads somewhere and it leads to separation. The way that God had intended the world to work was that we would be reunified, or we would not reunified, we would be unified with God. That we would live in fellowship with God and other people for eternity in perfect harmony. But because of sin, there is now separation. And if you just stop right here, the word gospel means good news. You would say, well, this is all terrible news. Just sin and separation, like that leaves us in an awful place. But because God in his goodness loved us so much that he gave his only son for us through sacrifice. Jesus comes down, he lives among us. And when the time was right, he lays his life down, his perfect life. It was the perfect sacrifice that starts to take care of our sin and our separation. His wounds healed us. It is good news. And then on the other side of that, because we have now experienced the sacrifice, there's kingship. That we can submit ourselves to a new king and follow a new rule of order that suddenly now from sin and separation to sacrifice and kingship, we are now unified once again with God. And now we have the ability to not be held victim by our old lives. We are now freed up to live the life that God has always desired for us. That we don't have to look to our eternity with fear of like, what's gonna happen when I breathe my last breath, but we can look forward to the anticipation of being in God's presence as our King forever. Sin and separation to sacrifice to kingship. And so what happens when you start removing any one of these major blocks? It starts to complicate and make things awful. So, hey, if you take away sin from the equation of the gospel, suddenly now Jesus' death is just a metaphor, right? Like it's about sacrificial love. It's about laying yourself down for a movement. And like there's some good elements to it, but honestly, like that's not something that changes people. It doesn't get you back to God. So suddenly you take sin out of the equation and it messes up the whole gospel. But what happens if you don't remove sin? What happens if you remove sacrifice? And you say, oh, well, this is the gospel right here. It goes sin, separation, kingship. Well, suddenly now all the pressure's on me because I have to do all the work to get back to God. That I'm gonna follow the rules, I'm gonna do the things that he says. If I can just try my hardest, then suddenly God will love me again and I can balance the scales in my favor and I will be good with God once again. Like it starts getting problematic. Like what happens if you remove sacrifice from the equation? Like what happens if you remove kingship? What happens if you remove any one of these different elements and suddenly the gospel doesn't mean what it was supposed to mean? And what happens when this equation gets broken is it screws everything up. Now, you would expect me to say this as your pastor, but your thoughts about God are supremely important. The way that you see how he is related to you. That if he didn't die for you, then he is just this lording despot over the world and over creation, trying to kick you in line. If you remove separation, then there was no need for him to come in the first place. Now, the reality is that more often than not, when you start playing with the equation of the gospel, when you start taking some of these key elements out, there's usually one of two extremes that people fall into. They either fall into the extreme of effort or they fall into the extreme of idolatry. And so what does this mean? Because you hear the word idolatry and you're like, well, that's not something that we really struggle with today. That's little gold figurines that people would bow down and worship. But idolatry is whenever you turn to something other than God to fill that God-shaped hole in your heart. And the way that it really comes out in 2025 for us is whenever you have that thought creep into your head of, if I just had another promotion, I think I'd finally be happy. Or if I could just find the right person, then my life would suddenly have purpose and meaning. Or, if I could just buy a home, or if I could just have kids, or whatever your thing is, whenever you try and fill that God-shaped hole with anything other than God, it turns out to be idolatry. And the real problem with idolatry isn't just having another God other than, the one in heaven. The real problem is it's not fulfilling. It will never satisfy. It will never make you whole or fulfilling. Now, effort, the other extreme, is when you think that if I can just be the best, if I can just follow the rules, if I can just make sure that the checklist is complete, then God's gonna have to love me. So one extreme is I'm trying to chase anything other than God. The other extreme is I'm trying to chase God with all of the wrong motives and all the wrong methods. Where it's if I can just go to church all the time, if I can just write big checks to charities, if I can just be loving to other people, then I'm going to obligate God to like me. And what happens when you take those two extremes, suddenly you get into some of those weird churches that maybe you've heard of, where suddenly, there's all of these rules that people have to follow, where it's all the women have to wear ankle-length jumpers all the time. The men are always bragging about how short their hair is. And, they only read out of certain kinds of Bibles. That's sometimes what ends up happening. And the thing is they think if I just do the right things, then God is obligated to like me. And so in Corinth, what happened is they immediately started chasing idolatry and now they're chasing effort. But how did this happen? And for us, a couple thousand years later, what happens when we start hearing the types of truths or the types of lies that make us say, that was made for me, I'm gonna follow that? How do we put ourselves on guard? See, one of the things that he says in verse 3 is, but I fear that somehow your pure and undivided devotion to Christ will be corrupted. And then he gives this big throwback. Just as Eve was deceived by the cunning ways of the serpent. Now, this is a story from the book of Genesis, which is the very first book in the Bible. And if you were to read through Genesis this afternoon, you would see that the first 3 or 4 chapters are all devoted to the very, very beginnings and about our first parents. And whether you're somebody that's like, man, I don't know about like this whole talking snakes and like the creation story, I personally believe that it's true, but even if you're like on the fence, follow with me and understand some of the principles that are going on here. Is that in the story of creation, God makes man and woman in his own image, and he places them in this perfect paradise, a garden. And he shows them around. He says, you can eat of any tree that's in this garden with the exception of one. So literally 99.9% of these trees you are welcome to, but not the tree with the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And so one day this serpent goes to the woman and he says, did God really say that you're not supposed to eat of this tree? And Eve looks back at the serpent and she says to him, yes, that's exactly what God said. He said that we shouldn't eat of this tree. And then she adds little details, something that God never said. She says, we shouldn't even touch it, because if we do, then we will die. And the serpent looks at her and says, you're not going to die. Did you know that God's actually just trying to keep something from you? That he knows that if you eat from that tree, it's going to open your eyes. And you're going to have the same perspective that he does. And it's going to make you just like him. And so, of course, they eat of the fruit, and that's where sin comes from. But what Paul is saying here in 2 Corinthians is the same playbook that the serpent used on Eve is the same playbook that these false teachers are using on you. Here is the enemy's strategy. If you want to be on guard, that you don't just get deceived by a false truth or a false gospel, you got to watch for these things. What does the serpent do? What did these people do? They question God's words. He's like, did he really say that? You know, and the way this comes out today is whenever somebody starts to question God's intent, like, yeah, I know that's there, but like, let's re-examine it. Let's put it in 2025 context. Let's try and understand it from maybe our perspective. You know, the second thing that the serpent does is he denies God's words. He's like, that's not really true. And you start hearing people talk about this today, like, you're misunderstanding, like that we were never meant to follow this, that is ancient, it's archaic, it's not good for you, it's not good for human flourishing. We need to just dismiss this. And of course, where does it lead to next? He substitutes it for a lie. You know God's trying to keep something from you, right? You know that you'd be so much happier. You should just follow what your heart tells you to do. That, yeah, I know that your upbringing told you that would be a mistake, but come on, look around. Like, don't you think you're missing out on something? And the same strategy that the serpent used is the same strategy that these false teachers were using on the Corinthians. And it's the same strategy that we are liable to fall victim to as well. And see, the thing about temptation that we have to understand is that temptation is appealing. It doesn't look bad. It's great packaging, almost always. You look at it and you think, this is exactly what I want. Because if it wasn't appealing, it wouldn't be temptation. It wouldn't be tempting to you at all. And so what happens in Corinth, at least I'm convinced, is that they experienced the whiplash, right? They experienced the whiplash of they went hard towards idolatry. And in the garden, eating of the fruit is idolatry. It is, I think I'm missing out on something. I'm going to take something that I think will fill that God-shaped hole in my heart. But then when the same thing happens in the garden, when they eat of the fruit, that happens to us. They ate the fruit, and their eyes are immediately opened, and they felt something for the very first time, shame. They realized what I have done was wrong. And they look at each other, and they see that they're naked, and like, this isn't right. And so what they do is they go and they try and cover up their shame. This is the whiplash. They tried it. It was not fulfilling. It made them feel bad about themselves. So they overcorrect and they try and cover it up. And so they go to the fig leaves and they sew it into clothing and they cover up their nakedness. And when God comes down to talk to them, they're like, hey, I think we're okay, right? But they're not. Because the whiplash goes from idolatry to effort. I'm going to do my hardest to cover up what I think I have done that is wrong. And what I actually believe happened in Corinth was in the first book, they're chasing after everything else. It's idolatry. And then I think they felt really bad about themselves, especially when they were called out. And so what they tried to do is they tried to cover it up. And so when you suddenly have these groups of teachers that come in and say, if you just try a little harder, if you just follow these rules, if you just stay in line, God will be good with you again. They were victim to the effort. In fact, here's where it keeps going in verse 13. It says, these people are false apostles. They're deceitful workers who disguise themselves as apostles of Christ. But I am not surprised, because even Satan disguises himself as an angel of light. So it is no wonder that his servants also disguise themselves as servants of righteousness, because in the end, they will get the punishment their wicked deeds deserved. Here's how Satan works. Here's how the enemy works. It looks really good. It's not painfully obvious. We think like, oh yeah, the enemy, he's got like the pitchfork and the red hooves, and he's hiding in the back alley speaking with a raspy voice, but it just doesn't work that way. Why is it appealing? Because it looks great. Do you know why a Venus flytrap works? Is there any biology people in the room? Okay, a couple, so I actually do need to know what it's appealing to the fly. I was just gonna fake it, but now I have to do it. It's appealing to the fly. Like the fly is there and it looks exactly like the type of thing it wants to land on. So it does, and of course it grabs it and never lets it go. Do you know why rat poison works? It's because there's a little bit of poison wrapped in a bunch of things that rats love. And so when the rat smells it, it's like, yeah, that's food. And it races in there and it starts to eat it. The bait is appealing. You have to remind yourself, where does this path lead? You have to realize you are susceptible to good packaging. That you want to chase the things that you shouldn't. And that you have to be able to see where the lies are. And sometimes you need to remind yourself, if I keep going this direction, where does this lead? So it seems like a really small compromise right now. But if this compromise builds on itself, where does it eventually land? See, this is part of the deception in the garden. When the serpent says, you're not really gonna die. And Eve takes that bite out of the fruit that first time. You know what happened? She didn't die immediately. So Adam watches this and says, well, it must be okay too, right? And so he takes a big bite as well. Sometimes when you chase down the wrong path, it doesn't have an immediate consequence. But you have to be able to project, where does this lead? If I keep following this philosophy, if I keep following this plan, if I keep chasing my heart, where does that lead? Are you gonna hurt somebody that you love deeply? Are you gonna walk away from your faith? Are you gonna have to get a new family? I mean, I don't know, where does it lead? You have to realize that you are more susceptible to good packaging than you think. So you got to know your code. You got to know, like, what are the types of packaging that appeals to me? So how do we protect ourselves from the terrible products in good packaging? Here's some things to think about. The first is you need to ground yourself. You got to know what you believe and why you believe it. When I get up here and I talk on Sundays, don't just nod your heads and be like, yeah, that sounds great. Like, you need to know if what I'm saying is true, right? Like, you need to be on guard. And the FBI, they famously, like, whenever they try and train people to spot counterfeit bills, they don't hand them like a stack of counterfeit currency. What they do is they make them study the real thing. And for us, if you're like, I really want my faith to mean a lot to me, if I really want to be grounded, you got to know what you believe, and you got to know why you believe it. Like, I would just kind of recommend that maybe consider this as we head into the month of August, signing up for something I'm calling Find and Follow 101. It's the idea of, like, we walk through the foundations of the gospel together in a couple hours on a Sunday morning. You might consider signing up for something like that. Or maybe once we get to the fall, we do something called Theology Lab, which is where we take some of the core tenets of our faith and we look at not just people's opinions on it, but the actual scripture behind it. Because if you want to be on guard from being led astray, you need to ground yourself. Here's the second thing, is that you need to give permission to someone to tell you the truth. See, for the Corinthians, this was Paul. And the thing is, like, one of the things I love about Paul in this passage is he presents himself as like a loving and caring dad. He says these things about his relationship with the Corinthians, like, guys, I am jealous for you. And not the kind of bad jealousy that you have to be on guard for, the kind of jealousy that maybe those of you who are spouses, you don't want your spouse like looking at somebody else with, that look, right? Because you're jealous for their affection. As a parent, you're jealous that your kids go the right path and follow you and not just chase after the wrong things, right? He's saying, like, this is the kind of jealousy I have for you. It's not the kind of selfish thing that I'm trying to like control you or manipulate you. I just don't want you to fall victim again. He says, like, I want to present you as a bride. Like, the idea that you are betrothed to God. And I don't want you to have to go in with some awkward conversations with God on that night to just say, like, yeah, my past was not great. Like, I want you to know that when you go before God, like, you're in good standing. And then it's so funny because there's a part in the passage that he gets to where he goes through this long list of just all the things that he's endured as an apostle. He's like, I've been shipwrecked, I've been beaten up, I've been left for dead, I've had to sneak out of the town when people were trying to kill me. And in a way that only a parent will understand. He's like, all of that stuff pales in comparison to the concern that I just have for you. You need somebody in your life who cares about you like this, that cares about you enough to sit you down and say, I'm seeing a pattern in your life, and it's not going to lead to a good place. That maybe you've fallen victim to some good packaging and a terrible product. And I need you to reconsider. And not because they're trying to get anything out of you, but because they want something for you. Because they love you and they care for you. In the church world, we call this discipleship, like somebody that walks alongside you. And then here's the third thing. You need to get honest about what tempts you. You need to know your code. What do you want to say yes to that's so appealing? If it's like, I really want to believe that I can try my hardest and that I can earn God's affection. You need to know that about yourself. And you got to remind yourself that your relationship with God is not built on what you do. That when you go to church every week and when you read your Bible every day, it doesn't like fill God's love scoreboard. And he's like, oh, I love Matt the most. Have you seen his streak in YouVersion? Right? Like, God doesn't do that. If you know that's your temptation, you need to protect yourself. If you know that your temptation is just to follow your heart and just do whatever you want and not really care about who gets hurt in the process, you need to know that about yourself. So you can remind yourself that God has not just called you into a relationship, he's called you to follow him, and that his ways are the best. His ways are better. His ways will lead to your flourishing. They will lead to your thriving. They will make you happier and more whole. See, following Jesus isn't just right, it makes your life better. Like, you need to know that about yourself. But we also need to be honest and recognize that here in 2025, many of us, probably myself included, at some point, we've taken the bait, right? Like, something was presented to us and we grabbed the fruit and we ate it, and we're trying to deal with the aftermath. And we just need to ask the question, like, where is the hope? Because if we only look at this as preventative, which it's great if it's preventative, but we don't see that there's a cure in this as well, we're missing something. Well, there is no depth that Jesus won't go to rescue us. See, like our first parents, we're liable to screw up. And see, in Genesis chapter 3, what happens is God comes down into the garden, and he knows that they've fallen. He knows that they've failed. They come after he calls them out of the bushes, and they're all covered in their fig leaves. He's like, guys, you need to understand, like, there's some consequences. And he walks them through the consequences. But in the midst of what we call the curse, he signals that there's hope. Because, someday there's going to come a moment where the seed from the woman is going to crush the head of the serpent. And it's only going to bruise his heel. And what we know now is, like, this was looking forward to Jesus as he would come and he would reestablish and say, yes, sin and separation, but sacrifice is coming. And then what he does is he kills an animal and he takes the skins and he covers up their nakedness for them, because it's not about how they can do it themselves. It's all about what God can do for them. And we see that there is hope even in one of the worst situations. But I think there's a story that maybe would give us more hope or encapsulate this maybe a little bit better for us. There's a story in the Old Testament about this prophet by the name of Hosea. And Hosea is given a mission by God that I'm sure made him say, "What now?" when he says it. Because God says to Hosea, I want you to marry a prostitute. And the picture and the symbolism that was supposed to be there in this moment was the same way that this woman who he loves, named Gomer, has given herself over to so many other people. There's still hope for her, and that God can rescue her. And so, for us, God can come and he can pull us out of any life that we've been a part of. And so, Hosea finds Gomer, and they get married, and they start a family. And Hosea's love for Gomer grows. I mean, they have children together. They start sharing monumental parts of their life. They love each other. But then somewhere along the line, I'm not sure when, but Gomer starts hearing that voice in the back of her head that reminds her, like, hey, do you remember how good it used to be? You remember the financial independence you had? Remember the freedom you had, just go whenever you wanted and do whatever you wanted to do? And the way that, sin sometimes does in our own life, as we look back and we forget all the bad parts of our past, her old life starts to seem really appealing. And so one day, she walks out the door and she doesn't go back. And she goes and she starts her old life again. And can you imagine the heartache that that Hosea must feel? Like, this woman that he loves, the mother of his children, has left. And it's not just that she left, it's that she's giving herself to any and everyone who has enough money. And at some point, though, things go south for her, and she ends up falling victim to a man who would oversee her employment and demand a cut in whatever she produced. And at this point, God tells Hosea, I want you to love your wife again. I want you to go find her. And so he goes out onto the streets and he starts looking around. He starts asking questions. He's finding people that maybe he has an idea might know a little bit of where she's at. And he gets word of where she's at. And he goes into that corner of the city. And he sees her, the wife that he loves. The problem is, he can't just bring her home. He has to go to her boss. And he has to tell her, I want my wife back. And he gives him a price. He's like, no, I don't think you understand. I want my wife to come home. And so he ends up having to pay the price, 15 shekels of silver and a homer of barley. And he has to purchase his wife back. And he brings her home, and he loves her again. And guys, this is the gospel. Sin, separation, sacrifice, and kingship. And the truth is, there are moments when we say, I believe it. And then our old life starts calling back to us. And we start walking the opposite direction. And we go back maybe sometimes even to the depths of our despair. Sometimes things are worse than they've ever been, and it's bad. But there's no depth that Jesus won't go to rescue us. The gospel is, Jesus says, I will pay whatever price necessary to bring you back home again. And so even in the midst of what it means for us in 2 Corinthians chapter 11 of, we sometimes want to believe the things that we shouldn't about God, but even when we do fall victim to it, the doors are wide open. He's saying, come back. I still love you. Is it fair? No. But it was never meant to be. The gospel of sin, separation, sacrifice, and kingship. It does not need to be improved. It does not need to be changed. We're to be committed to it. And when we ground ourselves in something like this, and we allow other people into our life to speak truth to us, when we're honest about what tempts us and we just know the areas that we are likely to go, we can stand firm when the temptation is there, start going in the opposite direction. Here, let me pray for us. God, we thank you for your goodness. We thank you for your grace. We thank you for the way that you love us in spite of the fact that we don't really deserve it. God, we're sorry for the moments when we chase the idolatry and the moments when we chase the effort. I pray, God, that you would ground us in the gospel, that you would ground us in what it means to follow you, that God, that you would ground us in the fact that we are loved for a reason. The God, that we are loved because you gave yourself for us. The God, that you have given us the value, that you have given us our worth, and the God, that you're offering us our purpose as well. So God, I pray for those here who is contemplating what the gospel would mean to them, that God, that you would allow them to hear that despite the sin and the separation, that God, you died for them, that you love them and you care for them, and you're calling them into a new life. One that would make their life better and make them better at life in the process. That God, maybe there are some who would say right now, I want to say yes to you, God. So I'm asking you to forgive me of my sins and take full control of my life. And the God, that you would lead me where you want me to go. I pray this all in your son Jesus' name. Amen.